Hello and welcome to Women in Tech powered by Bird & Bird. In this podcast series, we hear from inspirational people leading the charge at the forefront of innovation and technology. My name is Anna Morgan and I'm a partner in our International Privacy and Data Protection Group based in Dublin, where I lead the Irish practice in this area. I'm also a member of the firm's wider tech and comms group, in which we support and advise companies which are carving the world's digital future. I am delighted to be joined for today's podcast episode by Rena Maycock. Rena is the founder of Cilter Technologies, a company based in Dublin. And Cilter is an innovative tech startup which is focused on making internet use safe for kids. While it's still in the research and development phase currently, Cilter will produce operating system level software which detects and blocks offensive and harmful content for child users at device level. Rena, hello, welcome to the podcast and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Anna, and inspirational. I'm not sure about that. I hope I do you justice now.
I'm absolutely sure that you will. And I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you today, Rena, because we share a similar passion and we've had lots of great discussions around this before. And it's, of course, all about children's rights and protections in the digital world.
I'm very excited to take part, Anna. We have had some great discussions, so hopefully other people listening to this will benefit from hearing us shoot the breeze.
I absolutely think so. I think our listeners are going to be fascinated by your story, Rena, by the tech for good ethos that lies behind your company. And really, they're going to be mesmerized by the gargantuan issues that you're setting out to tackle through Cilter. And, that's not just in the digital world where we'll be talking about the risks that children face online, but also I know we're going to hear from you about challenges in real life where female tech founders are facing all sorts of obstacles. And we're going to come to talk about both of those themes a little bit later on today. But first, I thought maybe a good place to start in our chat today is to look at the journey that you have been on in your own career, from marketing executive to radio station CEO to now the point you're at, tech founder of Cilter. I know our listeners would love to hear more about how you've arrived at this point in time, where according to media reports, you have secured one of the largest first seed funding rounds amongst sole female founded companies in Ireland. I mean, that's really such an achievement. We're going to come back to talk about some of your experiences of the funding space. But really my question for now is, how did you get here? I suspect that you did not just wake up one morning and decide that you wanted to be a tech entrepreneur.
No, absolutely not. And marketing executive was probably glamorizing me a little bit in my early days. I started off as a salesperson, actually. I went to college and I wanted to be an editor. And I came out as a film editor and I came out with glowing results. And I thought I'd walk into a job and I didn't. And so I spent a few months as a runner working in a post-production company. And I realized it was going to take me probably about 2 years to move my way up the ladder to tape op, which certainly is a long way off film editor. And I got bored of it. And I thought I don't have the staying power to stick with this. And I wanted to earn some money. And I said to my mother, how do I make money? And she said, well, you can either sell or you can produce something. And I said, I don't know how to produce anything, so it's going to have to be sales. So very long story short, I applied for a job at 98 FM and I got it selling advertising. And I started from there. So I think I was 21 when I went in there and I moved up to sales manager. I think I was 22. And then direct sales manager. And then I had a variety of jobs. I left 98 FM in order to move up in the world. And I worked in Sky TV. I worked in Sunshine, what used to be Dublin's Country Mix. And I had a number of management roles in media, including sales director, sales manager, and eventually general manager. And then the last job I had for the man, I was chief executive of a group of radio stations called iRadio. And then things weren't great in radio back then. And so I, left there and started a matchmaking company randomly. And that was a great success. And we were, trucking along with that business. And in truth, about 7-8 years ago, I became a bit bored with it. I wasn't really getting challenged very much. And it was going very well. It was growing year on year. And my husband was able to run that with the team very easily. And then around the same time as I was having my kids, I came up with the idea for Cilter. So I had a bunch of roles before I decided to become a tech entrepreneur. And, the journey in tech entrepreneurship was a bit organic in that around the time I was having my kids, I kept getting served the image of Alan Kurdi, if you recall, Anna, the image of the little Syrian boy that washed up on the beach in Turkey. And I couldn't cope with seeing his image. I was very emotional and hormonal. So I looked around for a filter on Facebook and Twitter so that I didn't need to be served his image anymore, selfishly. And I couldn't find a filter. And I spoke to some friends I knew. I asked them if they knew of a filter, and they didn't. But they all said, when you find one, let me know, because I'm always getting served images and stories that I don't want to see. So yourself, Anna, when something might pop up on the Guardian or the Times that it's a story about a child having been abused, or something like that, and you think, I did not need that in my day. So that's originally where the idea hailed from. And when I had my kids, my perspective changed entirely, and all of a sudden all I could see were headlines of kids that had been systematically cyberbullied, groomed, sextorted from, coerced, and pushed into the irreversible. And there was one common thread, and that was that parents didn't know there was a problem with their child until it was far too late. And obviously with two small kids, I was terrified. They weren't going to get their hands on smartphones immediately, but it was coming down the track. And I thought, surely there's somebody trying to solve this issue for parents. And that's how it all began.
Thanks for taking us through your really rich and diverse career path to date, Rena. I think there's so many different points that I could pick up on that our listeners would love to hear more about, but maybe those are podcasts for another day. Maybe just sticking with the theme around Cilter and, the software that is the Cilter product. And, as you have described, and I mentioned at the start, this is at its core a child protection technology, and it's going to be embedded into the operating system of a device like a phone or a tablet. I love that the idea, the genesis of the inspiration for this has really come from a very kind of personal and kind of quite emotive space, I suppose, in terms of your own kind of personal experiences of the online world. And I'm interested, I suppose, in hearing more about what the reaction has been from investors, institutional investors, private investors, and, institutions that give out funding as well, when you've gone to them with the idea for this product, for this software, and you've talked to them about what your mission is. How do you describe the kind of core mission of Cilter when you're speaking to those sorts of people who might be very removed, I suppose, from the type of personal experiences that you have described that were behind that light bulb moment that you had back in 2016?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back a little bit if that's okay, and it'll explain that funding journey. When I had the idea for Cilter, I'm not a technologist, obviously, and I spoke to a friend of mine who is a technologist, and he said, what you're talking about is a really natural fit for a parental control. And he said, look into that space. So I looked into the parental control market, and I found that the tools available to parents to protect their kids when they gave them a smartphone in the main were smartphone apps. In fact, that's all that was available really for smartphones. And there's about 250 parental control apps on the app stores, and they all shared a variety of features. They all had access restriction so that you could stop your child becoming addicted to their phone. They had pornography blocking, they had geofencing and geo-tracking, but none of them were dealing with cyberbullying and grooming. And I could not believe that there was no solution to cyberbullying and grooming. So I thought, it can't just be me that wants this solution as a parent. So there was a web-wide study that had been done at the time by the Irish government to assess parents' concerns when they gave their child a smartphone, and there was four main equal concerns. So parents were concerned their child would access pornography, spend too much time online, or be groomed or cyberbullied. And I thought pornography and access restriction were being super served by what was available on the App Store, but nobody was dealing with cyberbullying and grooming. So 50% of parents' needs weren't being met at all. So going back to my salesperson's hat, I was thinking, if we build it, they will come. And it just never made sense to me that surely little old me couldn't be the first person to ever think of a solution to cyberbullying and grooming. So I looked into the reasons why nobody was doing it. And when I looked into it, I realized nobody was doing it because it's hard. So there's apps operate on a peer-to-peer system. So you can download all of the state of the art of the parental control apps onto a child's device, but they will never, ever be able to access messaging apps, which is in the main where grooming and cyberbullying takes place. So in order to tackle cyberbullying and grooming, you need to be able to look inside messaging apps. And the earliest point in the technological stack that you can do that is the kernel level of the operating system. So it needs to be embedded technology. So nobody was doing it because you effectively hand over your autonomy as a private company because you need an operating system modification or a smartphone manufacturer basically to embed your technology. So you rely on a third party effectively. So we weren't going to be deterred. We decided to do it anyway. And then we started down the fundraising journey, which leads me nicely to answering your question. Very quickly we realized this is deep tech. We worked out the numbers. We thought it would take about 4 million to get us to market. 4 million anywhere in the world is a fruity seed raise. In Ireland it's virtually impossible. So we knew we would need to de-risk it with some public money. You're never going to get 4 million from private investors or VCs as a seed raise, because principally VCs don't like to fund R&D. They like to fund commercialization. So we knew we'd need to de-risk it with some grant money. So we started the process of going down the Horizon 2020 route as it was then. Applied and got 4 seals of excellence, which means extremely close but no cigar. And then eventually we applied for the Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund, which is funded by the Irish government in partnership with DCU and ADAPT. And we got our 2.8 million non-dilutive grant. And then we had to raise co-funding, which we did from angel investors. And we took no institutional money. VCs weren't interested in backing us. So we ended up raising from angels, all kind of just, very wealthy people that really believed in what we were doing. And we found that, so going back to the reason why we applied for H2020, it's a reasonably well-known thing in deep tech circles, particularly with women founders, that if you are a female founder of a deep tech company, the expectation is that you need to go and de-risk with public money, particularly with H2020. And the reason H2020 struck out was because they have a mandate to fund a minimum amount of female founded companies, and not diverse teams, female founders. I think off the top of my head, it's something like 30% of each fund is supposed to go towards funding female founders. So the door is very much open there. Having said that, has a statistical success rate, or it did at the time, of about 1%, and it takes about 4 person months to put an application together. So every time we put an application together, we would incrementally get a little bit closer to the cutoff point and never quite got there. And then they changed the application process, and it was like starting a whole new process again, learning a whole new way of applying for the grant. And it's complex. It's very complex. So we were delighted to get the DTIF in the end. But in terms of private investors and their response to Cilter, you must understand that what we have going for us at Cilter is that as soon as we say we are developing child protection software for smartphones that detects and blocks cyberbullying, grooming, and suicide and self-harm content, there is never, ever any pushback on what we're trying to do. Immediately, people say, take my money. Where can I buy this? Please tell me I can buy it for my 8-year-old because I'm being pestered for a phone. There's never any pushback on the actual product. However, and it really surprised me, when I originally got into technology, yes, I'm not a technologist, but given the mission that we have, which is to be the machine standard parental control available on all computing devices and available to protect all children, I was told in the beginning, oh my word, you're a woman in tech. They will be throwing themselves at you. There is, even back then when we started the fundraising journey, everyone thought, internally, VCs have mandates. Enterprise Ireland have mandates to support women founders. And in truth, when I went out there, shoe leather, it certainly was not the case. Disappointingly as well, because I had a very different experience in media. In media, it's very much 50-50. I never found that being a woman stood in my way. I got to chief executive by the time I was 30 or 31. It was never an issue for me being a woman, but in technology, it has been a very, very different experience entirely.
We might just pause there for a second and circle back to that point that you make, Rena, in just a minute or two, because maybe just picking up on the reaction that you've described that, so many of the people that you talked to, so many of the potential investors had, which was that, it was one of wholehearted encouragement and kind of very positive reaction to it. Because of course, lots of investors, especially private investors, are people with kids in their lives, grandkids, nieces, nephews. And of course, lots of our listeners will also have children in their lives, and they equally are worried about the impact and the availability of harmful content and, the exchange of that type of messaging that you have described. And I'm sure they're all wondering, when is this solution available? So can you take us through the journey, I suppose, in terms of the development of Cilter? How far along the path towards launch of the software onto the market are you right now?
Yeah, so we had developed our prototype working on an encrypted app. We knew if we developed the prototype working on SMS, the first question would be, okay, yeah, that's fine, but what about encrypted messaging? Because that's where the future of harmful content for children is. And you'll know all about this, Anna, with the Digital Services Act coming in and forcing big tech to take responsibility for harmful content on their public platforms. But it doesn't compel them to look inside encrypted apps because they can't. So bad actors are not going to go away. They'll just slither away into encrypted apps, and encrypted apps will become more and more dangerous for children. So we decided to prove the technology working, and then we went about the fundraising journey. So without a big team to continue to work on spreading the technology out amongst the other apps, we kind of were at pause stage until we got the funding through. Now, we started to build the team, and people were working in their spare time, working unpaid, until we got our funding through. So we started our project, our 2-year project, on the 1st of May last year. So we're 7-8 months into a 2-year R&D project and doing very well, but we're still a year and a half, almost a year and a half away from market, but we're trying to get there as quickly as we can. Now, there are stumbling blocks. I was explaining to you that there's 2 different sides to our technology. There's the operating system modification, that's the embedded piece that's patented. And that is the method by which we access all the incoming and outgoing data on the smartphone. But then we have to compare that content against our own bespoke AI-driven databases of harmful verbatim language. So as part of the Disruptive Technology Innovation Project that we're doing, we committed to developing these bespoke data sets. And we did a huge public campaign there in October last year, inviting parents to submit chat logs of harmful content or harmful conversations rather that their children had been exposed to. So, I mean, cybersafe kids would say that 40%, in their research, 40% of 12 to 15-year-olds have experienced cyberbullying. So we're not talking about a small cohort here. So when we did our big public consultation, ultimately what we're trying to achieve is building the world's first repositories of harmful victim to cyberbully and victim to groomer harmful verbatim private language. So this is the first time in the world that we can see that this has been done. Now, the public consultation, it couldn't have gone better from a publicity perspective. We were all over all of the media, the newspapers, radio, RT, TV, and it just failed to really move the dial. And so it just goes to show you that, and I suppose on analysis, we found that what we think happened was we were victims of our own success. And what I mean by that was parents were looking at this and thinking, this is out there on the media. All the other parents are going to do this. I don't need to open this old wound. I don't need to contribute my chat logs. But in actual fact, the problem is, if it's everyone's problem, it becomes nobody's problem. So now we're kind of going through plan B, plan C, plan D to generate these data sets of this harmful verbatim language. And we're getting there. We've been supported by the GAA here, the IRFU, the National Association for Principals and Deputy Principals. Everyone is coming together to help us generate these data sets, because the more data we get, the more chat logs we get submitted, the richer our data sets will be, and therefore the better our detection efficiency will be. So that is the challenge that we're facing at the moment.
I mean, really, as I said at the beginning, gargantuan challenges, as you have mentioned, nobody else has yet kind of tried to take these on. And I suppose, it becomes obvious listening to you, and I suppose the need for this very kind of research-based development of the software as well. It's all kind of tied up in, I suppose, in the journey towards launching onto the market. So great to hear the strides and the progress that you've made so far. I would like to circle back to what you mentioned a few minutes ago around kind of the being a woman in the kind of tech founder space, the entrepreneurial space, and the kind of unique set of challenges that women can face when they're on a journey with a startup company. Can you talk us through some of the experiences and the challenges in particular that you've encountered along the way? You did hint at it before, but I'd love to hear a bit more about those.
Well, in fairness, it's not exclusive to me, and it's not exclusive to Ireland. I mean, in the world, the quantum of investment, VC investment specifically, that goes to women founders is extremely low. It goes anywhere, depending on where you're talking about, it goes anywhere from 2% to maybe 9% at the very most, in my experience from the research that I've seen. And that is preposterously low. Now, what I would say is there are a number of challenges facing women that stop the issue from being addressed. So what I mean by that is I speak to an awful lot of female founders, and a sizable number won't even contact a venture capitalist. They won't even pitch to them because they feel like the door is closed. They feel like they'll be wasting their time. They feel like they'll be met with subconscious bias. They feel like when they walk into those rooms, what is going to happen is they'll be bombarded with questions around risk as opposed to opportunity. And that's because that's what our lived experience is. And we sit on panels and we say, this is our experience with VCs. So as a consequence, an awful lot of female founders will avoid venture capital firms. They'll avoid family offices. They'll stick to angel investors, and they'll try to get grant funding and try and get to market based on that. And then once they're looking for follow-on funding like Series A, Series B, they will have traction behind them, and then they'll feel more comfortable about going to a venture capital firm. The unfortunate thing is there are no mandates in VCs. I mean, you will see quite a lot of venture capital firms sit on panels and be very proud about their investment success in diverse teams. And that's very frustrating for female founders, because what we see there when they talk about investing in diverse teams is, in some instances, a token woman will have been brought into the C-suite, or there may be a female marketing manager or a female HR manager. So really, what they should be reporting on and trying to do better on is investing in sole female founders. And I've been asked this question a number of times, even by, female VCs. What can we do to improve the situation? What can we do to improve deal flow? Because in fairness, deal flow may be low because a lot of women don't feel like they'll be welcome, therefore they don't bother. So deal flow might be low. And my answer is always, stop with female office hours, stop with pony shows, don't sponsor awards, just open up your checkbook and invest in female founders. And then the word will get out, and then more female founders will go and pitch to that VC. But there are a number of issues here, because women founders, for instance, like me, tend in a lot of cases to found companies that solve a societal issue, a big societal issue, principally around mental health, regular health. So you're talking about med tech, you're talking about deep tech, which is expensive. And, you may be talking about clinical trials, again, expensive. So a lot of women will tend to found those specific companies, which tend to be expensive R&D projects. And as I said, VCs don't like to fund R&D, they like to fund commercialization. And then the other thing is on the deal flow issue, a lot of women don't feel welcome. And then the other thing is they feel like there is subconscious bias, and there certainly is subconscious bias. Certainly in my experience, and I'm a salesperson, so I'm able to handle myself, and I'm a confident person. But I felt when I was going into the majority of VCs, I got questions that focused a lot on risk. Specifically around the business model. It was risk, risk, risk. What are you going to do if this happens? Have you considered if that happens? Have you considered if that happens? And I had, because as part of, H2020 and DTIF applications, anybody that has done these applications will know that a huge amount of your effort needs to go into a very, very rigorous risk register. You need to look into the deepest, darkest corners of your business and look at all the potentials that could go wrong and call them out, shine a spotlight on them, because you're dealing with evaluators at a European level, skilled generalists, that the first thing they will do is look at your risk register, and if they've thought of a risk and you don't have it listed, they'll give you a black mark and then you're done. You need to, and that is the great thing for investors, if they invest in a company that has gone through the rigor of a H2020 or a DTIF and been successful, they know that the deepest, darkest recesses of the company have been looked into and called out, and there is a risk mitigation strategy to match that risk. Despite that, we still couldn't get investment from institutional investors, and it was not for the lack of trying.
I can hear the frustration in your voice as you kind of recount your experiences, and it's really eye-opening to hear about this. And I know you've said to me before that, a man in a similar position would not have encountered those sorts of blockers, I suppose, particularly in the case of institutional investors. And of course, a lot of this goes back to ingrained practices and behaviors of different organizations, and at its core, you know, thinking of business and leadership in tech in a particular way. But if you were going to kind of translate all of those sorts of the kind of negative experiences that you encountered and kind of flip them on their head, and if you were asked to, like, say, advise the business community or government policy or um, generally private institutional investors on what they need to change to tackle those very specific sets of challenges you have described that seem to face female entrepreneurs, like, what would you recommend? What would be the list of must do things that they should implement in order to kind of change those kind of deep rooted practices?
Yeah, so I mean, I've written about this a good bit in the currency, and unfortunately, I've been shouting into a vacuum. So maybe somebody of big influence is going to be listening to this podcast.
Fingers crossed, Raina.
I'll use the opportunity to shout again. Um, when I was younger, I remember gender quotas came into politics, and I remember being mortally offended, thinking women don't need this. This is so patronizing. We don't need this. We just work harder, and we get places. We're capable of changing things on our own. We don't need quotas. And I remember being quite embarrassed about it. But at that time, I was living in a charmed existence in media where everything was equal. And as time has gone by, and my experience in technology has changed my viewpoint entirely. And I don't think anything meaningful will change unless there are rules. Carrot hasn't worked, so it's time for stick, as far as I'm concerned. And Enterprise Ireland and the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment in Ireland have the stick, and they can use it if they wish. My view on it is that 20%, there should be a mandate that 20% of VC funding should go towards sole female founders. Now, it's not possible for the government to impose that 20% mandate on private venture capital funds. However, Enterprise Ireland are, I think, the biggest LP in Europe as it stands. And they're very, very successful investors. And they give taxpayers' money to venture capital funds in Ireland to manage on our behalf as taxpayers. So my money and your money. I'm a woman, you're a woman. So I don't see why there shouldn't be a mandate for venture capital firms that get taxpayers' money to invest on taxpayers' behalf from Enterprise Ireland. I don't see why 20% of that shouldn't be mandated towards sole female founders. That would change things overnight for female founders. It would be the sea change that is necessary. And if venture capital firms aren't prepared to accept that mandate, well, then they shouldn't get taxpayers' money. That is my view. It would change things for women overnight. Now, I'm out the gap to a degree. I've got funding from angel investors, very, very supportive angel investors, the majority men, and taxpayers' money via the grant, the DTIF grant. So the reason I have this message and I keep beating this drum is because I've got a 7-year-old girl, and when she's leaving school at age 17, 18, and she's saying, considering her options about what she can do, I want her to consider entrepreneurship. I want her to consider technology entrepreneurship. And I want for it to be a very viable option for her. At the moment, if things don't change and it's still the same landscape, I would be saying to her, don't do it. It's heartbreaking. I've been doing this for years, and I've managed to stick with it because I had another company that my husband was running, and it managed to fund me. Most women don't have that luxury. Most women get starved out, or a lot of women get starved out because they can't keep it going for any longer than a year or two without getting funding and, putting food on the table. I had the great luxury of having another successful business that could see me through, so I could keep doing this until I got the funding I needed. But Nothing will change unless Enterprise Ireland and the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment do something about it. Now, one of the conversations I had suggesting this, a person in Enterprise Ireland said, well, we can't do that because when we go in as an LP into a fund, there are other LPs, and the other LPs, they won't join us in that fund if we're placing this mandate down. But that can't be true anymore, because every major company, every LP in the world has a D&I KPI that they need to stick to. So this feeds into that, into feeding that D&I KPI in most big companies. So I simply don't buy that argument anymore. I suggested, okay, if you don't want to place a mandate on the 20%, why don't you make it a stipulation that whoever applies, whatever VC applies to get taxpayers' money to manage on their behalf, that they publish on their own website what their agenda is and suggest that it might be 20%. And then it's almost like Drinkaware. They automatically change things, but it's managed from the inside. It's not as strict as the stick, but it's almost there. And again, that advice wasn't followed either. So in my view, those organizations need to place that 20% mandate down. It's not 50%, it's 20%. Baby steps. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah, so really fascinating to hear your take on these things, Rena. So really what you're saying is kind of mandatory investment quotas, particularly where there's public funds involved, and also transparency being a big part of it as well. And that, of course, connects directly to the strategic priority of nearly every business these days, which is D&I. Yeah, so thanks so much for sharing that. I'm conscious of time, and I think we're probably coming close to our slot for today's episode. And it's been really fascinating to hear about your story so far. And of course, it's still really only beginning, but already, as we've heard, you've become a champion for child protection, a champion for tech for good for female founders, and you've acquired a wealth of experience in navigating all the complexities of the technology and business worlds. So maybe just to close out our podcast today, is there a particular piece of advice that you would give to a budding female tech founder who's just setting out on a similar odyssey to the one that you have been on since 2016? And I think in particular, if there are sources of support, practical support and guidance that you would direct them to, that you had to find out about yourself, but you wish you'd known at the time, it would be great to hear about those too.
Well, I'm a big believer in networking, and my big networking tip would be that. So go to the opening of every envelope. That's how I managed to, make my way in the world. I had to teach myself about technology from the ground up. So I tried to learn by osmosis by just being around smarter people than me. So networking, go to the envelope with the opening of every envelope. There's invariably going to be a speaker, and there's usually a Q&A. So be the first, push yourself, get out of your comfort zone, and put your hand up and make some tenuous link between the speaker and your product, but stand up and introduce it. So that's what I would do. I, early doors, used to make a tenuous link, stuck my hand up, stood up and said, I'm Rena Maycock. I'm developing child protection software for smartphones that detects and blocks cyberbullying, grooming, and suicide and self-harm content. And I would ask my question. And then by the end, I didn't need to shake 100 hands or 200 hands. Whoever could help me in the room or whoever was interested in me would come and find me. And that's how I built my network. Go to those things and ask for help. Ask everyone to meet you for a coffee. Just get out there, tell them what your pain points are, and try and reciprocate. Whoever meets you for a coffee, just say, here's my pain point. I'm looking for funding, or I'm looking for somebody in a telco, or here's the problem I have. Ask people for help. They are very good about helping you, but also you might be able to help them as well. Get a number of female founders around you, make friends and force friendships if needs be. I would have found it extremely difficult if I didn't have a network of female founders that truly inspire me every day. But being a founder in general, not necessarily just a female founder, is a roller coaster. It's very emotional. There are highs, there are lows, and you need people that are enduring the same problems that you are. You may well find that you go home to your husband and talk to him, but if he's coming back from his job at the bank, he's not really understanding that your heart is in the floor because you didn't get another H2020 round or whatever. Whereas your female founders will understand that, and they'll pick you up and they'll remind you it's just one bad day. Don't worry about it. Tomorrow's going to be a better day. and they'll remind you to celebrate the wins, the small wins, celebrate them big, to get you through. But the one thing I would say is don't give up, be resilient, be tenacious, don't take no for an answer. Now, having said that, there have been times when I've met people and they've walked me through what their startup is and what their model is and that kind of thing. And I just know in my heart of hearts that they're not going to get off the ground. So if you're dealing with somebody and you know that their whatever their product is, it's just not a runner, be gentle about it, but be honest about it. It can be a bit brutal to hear, but it gives them the opportunity to change the way they're approaching things and do it slightly differently and stop doing it, this way that might not get them off the ground. But that would be my advice. Build a huge network as much as you possibly can and get those female founders into a WhatsApp group that you can rely on, because it's absolutely invaluable for success.
That's really valuable guidance and quite powerful insights, Rena. Thanks so much for sharing those. And look, it's fantastic to hear you talking about building a network of supports and finding like-minded people who are going through similar experiences as entrepreneurs, because I suppose, like all things in life, being successful in the tech and the business world, it's still all about human connection at the end of the day. Unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap up today's podcast at this point, even though I think we could probably fill another 5 episodes chatting on. It's been wonderful, exciting, fascinating to hear your story so far, Rena, and really quite refreshing to hear your frank account of the challenges that you have faced. And as you've said, that face so many women founders who stand and have stood in similar shoes to you. And of course, that's why it's so important to have these sorts of conversations. And indeed, that's really part of the essence of this Women in Tech podcast series. It's about shining a light on the experiences, both good and bad, of underrepresented groups. And I suppose it's only by calling out those sorts of deep-rooted blockers, which still remain, like those that you've talked us through today, that the business and tech worlds can really start to dismantle and tackle those blockers. So thank you so much for being such a wonderful advocate in this space. It's been truly insightful and inspirational speaking with you today, and we wish you great things with Cilter in the journey ahead.
Thank you very much, Anna. Really appreciate it. And of course, if anybody wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm approachable and I'll always make time for a coffee.
And finally, a big thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. We love having you with us for these inspiring conversations. So do look out for more great content coming from our Women in Tech, powered by Bird and Bird series soon.